AFL Fantasy 2025 is open for business. No lockout, no subscription, no pay your way in. It is open for every single person. You can jump in to AFL Fantasy and start picking your team right now. And this episode is all about my way too early day one selection. Who have I picked for my first draft of my AFL Fantasy side? I'm going to talk you through who I picked, why. Here was the parameters I gave myself, by the way. It was a 5 minutes. That's all you've got. Pick that first gut instinct side. I encourage you to maybe go and doing the same. Who have I got at D1? I'm going to Lockie Whitfield. I know I'm paying up big dollars for him, but honestly, as I kind of picked the side, I realized I had way more money than I realized. Maybe it's because I'm skimping in some other spots, but I just love what Lockie delivered for us last year. There is no value inherently on his head. Absolutely not. But structurally, I like what he is. I'm happy to drop down to a couple of different options, but I just wanted to see in this first incarnation of my side, knowing where I've skimped, is it worthwhile investing a little bit more on my defensive line, knowing he can be a captaincy option most weeks? Pretty happy to put Lockie at D1. Then here comes the value for pretty much every other selection in my starting squad. D2, I've gone Jaden Short, just over $800,000. I really like this selection. I think the Tigers have got to find multiple avenues to move the ball out of their defensive line. Rioli was one of those prime movers. He's historically been a 90s plus kind of guy in a Damien Hardwick coached era. If he even gets half of the split of market share of the Daniel Rioli scoring elements, he's heading back to that 90. I really like Jaden Short, what he's going to be and what he's going to do, and I'm happy to put him in my side. For some, he might be even as high as D1 if they don't want to pay up. Others, they might drift him to D3 or not even pick him at all. But to me, I really like the inclusion of a Jaden Short. D3, going a little speculative, but I loved the end of the year of Matthew Roberts. He became that clean, crisp run and carry ball user out of the Sydney Swans. Just skinny of 800,000 in at 780K. He's the kind of guy that you really love to look for in AFL Fantasy, where you know you're going to get some early runs, you're going to get some early options and look at him. And I think the fixture is at least favourable enough to keep him as a consideration. Now, a new coach means a bunch of new variables from players in positions to game styles. How much does Dean Cox change? We ultimately do not know. But at D3, before Christmas in December, I'm happy to take a look and feel at what it seems to have a Matthew Roberts sitting in that spot. So for me, he's in there. And at D4, he's right alongside his current captain in Callum Mills. He's had multiple seasons of 100 plus. He has been very speculative and hit and miss over the last 2 years, a combination of a multitude of injuries and a multitude of role variations. But if he can get some stability, he's going to be a fine scorer. And that stability doesn't have to be as a centre bounce mid. That can come as a playmaker off halfback. Gosh, it can even come off the wing. I'm not really too concerned about the positional function of Mills, but rather just the sellies all put him into every position that ultimately ruins his scoring. So I want to see some stability about his role. But to me, for a December pick, I'm happy to put him there. Kitty Coleman at 521K. D5. If you loved him last year, there's even more inherent value that sits into that selection. Now, I'm a little bit concerned because I do have some other Lions players and some early challenges around some buys to manage if this was to be my side handing into round one. But let's be honest, every team's first crack at it is just more those names you like, the value you like, the structure you've thought about a little bit, you've put it on paper and let it go. And that's exactly what this first team reveal is. It's not to tell you what my team will be in round one. It's not to tell you, and these are not cop-outs, by the way. It's also not to tell you what you shouldn't do. It's literally getting those players in onto a format and a structure. And then the massaging comes as further information comes out after January 1. Not just because that's when the 50 most relevant starts, and make sure you're tuned into this channel to be able to get every single episode, but also that's where the real information starts to slide out through the preseason. Kitty Coleman, D5. I think he's going to be a popular pick yet again in 2025. Then the rest of the players I've got selected are all cash cows of varying likelihood and ceiling of scoring. Toby Travalia, I love what he's going to be at 319k, a defender mid. I think he might just be one of the best cash cows for us in 2025. On this channel, just a few weeks removed now, we're joined by draft guru and good friend of the channel, Dylan Alexander. He listed the qualities that make Toby not just a great rebound, run and carry defender, but also why St Kilda believe he could turn into that new dynamic midfielder that they want to get. So I think this is a fantastic pickup for the Saints, and I'm actually really quite bullish on Toby Travalia. If a few of my defenders changed, I wouldn't be shocked through the preseason, but it's going to take a lot to remove Toby from my starting squad. And then Bo Allen and Saad El Hawley round out my sides. There is a world where I go a little bit skinnier in my defensive line, and I've thought about this structurally, put a little bit more emphasis into another line, because as you go through this team, you'll see I've skimped in some other areas to afford not just a big D1, but go running deeper in some other areas. Whether that ultimately is the right approach, you get to make your decision. I get to make mine. And we've still got 3 months to make that decision. Saad El Hawley, I think he might just be, again, one of those cash cows you could play on field, but we'll wait and see whether or not he cracks the best 23 at the Bombers. Let's head into the midfield. Tom Green, for me, gives me exactly what I'm looking for at that M1 spot. Captaincy credibility, a little bit of value inside it, and the potential of being the top scoring midfielder for the season long. You could look at a number of different options in that spot, but to me, yes, it's a 6-figure player, and I've got 3 of them in my starting squad. You now know 2 of them. But to me, I really like Tom Green. I'm very bullish on him. Maybe it's because it's the closest thing to a Josh Kelly. Yep, I got him on the team reveal. That's the only way he's going to get there, isn't it? So to me, Tom Green, M1, I really, really like him. I'm quite bullish on him in 2025. In at M2 is Connor Rosie. I talked about him in my AFL Fantasy video that is available on this channel, as why I think he's going to be one of the best 22 players, one of the top 8 mids for the year. The reason I've got him here is we're paying for him basically at 100 sort of range, and I think he's got a 105, 110 capacity. So to get that sort of value in a guy that is really done when you take those injury-impacted games out, an average of around the 105, 6, 7 marker, to just get that little bit of value in a guy who I think is a top liner anyway, let alone a really nice fixture to start the year, put those things combined, I'm happy to run Connor at M2. Tim Taranto at M3, again, a popular name we're going to hear a lot in the off-season. Probably not as much value as you might find he presents in the other formats of the game, but that is just the way the pricing works in AFL Fantasy. But regardless, to get a guy who has got a period of time in 2023 where he's running at 120, and a guy that we know is really closer to a 105, 110 guy at this price range, does scream a little bit of value. He's got that lion's share of the scoring stocked up in this Richmond midfield. We know what good fantasy players do in teams that are just developing. We have seen that over time. LDU, Rory Laird, Touk Miller, Jack Steele. They have had these big chunks of fantasy scoring, and I think it's going to be a similar destiny for Tim. And so he's going to sit in there at M3. Going to start dropping in under the 900k marker, and I want to at least have a dabble at what it means to look and see. It's starting with Will Ashcroft at M4. It's a hype pick, not going to lie, but his final season and ultimate grand final performance does just show off his fantasy showcases. He's got about 20 points per game of value of what I think he can be, which is sort of that 100 range midfielder versus what we're paying for in price, just under that 850k marker. And I think if you put all those variables together, again, as a pre-Christmas selection, I'm happy to at least have a look at what this does to my shape and size of my side. Again, I'm skinny in certain parts of the ground because I'm trying to see what it looks like. With all these players, I like the shape of them in my side, and then seeing ultimately what are the changes I'll make. In at M5, I'm going for Clayton Oliver. If he's fit and has a flawless preseason, I just don't see how at under 800k, he's not one of the most highly selected players. It is risk city if he does have some challenges through the off-season, both professionally and personally. But we can only go by what we know, and that is he is ticking all the boxes right up till Christmas. Therefore, I'm happy to start with Clary. He's a 110 potential mid at a crazy significant price. I'm happy to get on there. M6, running deep. This is where I'm running at my deepest depth line because I think there's some crazy value in the forwards. That just mean I can go really deep and heavy through the mids. I'm running Will Day at 760,000. I think he's a 90-95 mid, and I'm paying nowhere near that price point. Hawthorn showed that when he's in that side last year and the season prior, he is that playmaker in and around that grunt midfield. I really like what Will can do. His class and his hardness around the ball do make him a perfect AFL fantasy prospect. So I'm running him in through there. Now, I'll be honest, I've flirted with running a few cash cows through here. And maybe I end up doing it. But there's something about the value at James Peatling, and running him at M7 is deep. I ain't lying about that. But I do just look for the value in every position, and he screams value to me. He's basically a guy that, well, he's a mid-60s average by price point, but when he had that centre bounce role and opportunity at GWS, he was a mid-80s guy. So it needs to be a little more than a 20 points per game jump at this price point, but I do see a world where he becomes a 90s mid at the Crows. Again, do I just drop it down to a Smiley type and put him on field, or an Ashcroft brother type who I've got on the bench and put him on the field? Look, it's probably more likely where I go. But like I said, I'm looking at all these guys that I go, I like you, I like this option, I want to see what it looks like and then correct as I go. So yeah, Peatling, M7, I'm running super deep and heavy. I don't think I'm going to in the end, but it's what I did first, and I promise to give you my very first draft of my side. M8, Sid Draper. Yeah, a few Crows in this side. Every bit of information I can get out of Westlakes that they are making public, and everything I can get secretly underneath the surface just tells me this guy's absolutely a dynamo and he's killing it through the midfield. You might be like, hang on, the Crows don't play their first round picks in their preferred position. They didn't do that with Dan Curtin last year. And I hear that, and that is a valid point, but I would raise you the 2 seasons prior to that. Max Michaelaney, he was in a preferred position, played a lot, and from the start of 2020 through that defensive line, and then also a Josh Rochelle played as that damaging impact general forward in his first year. So pick and choose your arguments would kind of be my response to that, but I would hear that critique for sure. On the bench, as always, our bench options can change, but Xavier Lindsay and Levi Ashcroft are 2 of the best cash cows we are going to get in 2025. Don't forget to check out that video I alluded to earlier on this channel from myself and Dylan Alexander, where we talk about Toby Travalia and ultimately who he believes are the top 10 fantasy rookies and the most relevant ones for 2025. A couple of those names that I just mentioned there in Lindsay, Ashcroft, Draper, Travalia, all make high on that list. Let's head into the rucks. This is where the separation comes for me. I really like Tim English this year. There's just something about him, and he's my R1. There's something about Tim that I'm finding undeniable. And the other component is I'm just not convinced that set and forget is the right approach at this point in time for 2025. You could argue that English, Gawn, Marshall, Cherry, gosh, even a Briggs could find a way back, and a Tom DeConey could find their way, all being within a handful of points of each other. And I just don't see a clear and supreme ruck selection. So therefore, I'm going for the guy who I think presents a little bit of upside, whose downside I think is basically what he gave us last year, and gives me a little bit of edging both ways around what I want to pick. Look, I could go down and pick other options through there, but I just don't see myself paying all the way up to the top in AFL Fantasy just yet, but I also don't want to go too mid-price crazy. I think that's because I'm going a bit mid-price crazy in at R2. I've got Matty Flynn. I am going all the way down, and if I don't do him, well, that's where the Peatling money that I alluded to earlier very easily can get redeployed and then go and spend up on that $900,000, $1 million plus sort of option. So it's a very easy structural move for me. I know where the money movements need to come, but I think Matty Flynn is an 80s ruck if he is indeed able to reclaim that number 1 ruck mantle. I know it's not as simple as and easy as it might have been 12 months ago, and injuries are certainly just crushing him. But as you can see through the players I've got in my team, I'm trying to minimize my injury flight risk. I know Taranto's one of those. I know Flynn's another one of those. You could probably argue historically Whitfield is, but it's not been the case recently. I'm happy to take the punt on him. It's a big structural change, but I like him at R2. And then I've got Alex Dodson at R3, more because I I think I just wanted to pick him because my Crows didn't. So I'm picking him so I can feel like at least I got some of that ruck ownership. And then head to the forward lines. I think our rucks are going to see a lot of divergence. I think our mids and even our defence will see a lot of differentiation. But it is just going to be vanilla scoop on vanilla scoop in our forward lines. I am seeing a very similar theme of 5 and then maybe 1 or 2 differentiations, whether people go start with Horne-Francis or don't. Do they start with a safety barrier like a Dylan Moore? Do they think there's a bit of upside in Rankin, or do they go a different set of rookies? But I can see a common 5 getting picked in our forward lines, and it'll all start off with Jack Macrae. The narrative and pathway to his scoring heading back to 90 plus, which is really all we need to be a premium forward, at least in our starting squads. I think there's a narrative for how it gets there. Now, can he? Well, that's a big conversation for the preseason, but I can see the pathway and thought process of how, and I'm happy to take a look at him at 732k. There's just no risk. I've got his teammate Mateus Philippou at F2. There's something about Mateus and his back end of the year that when he had that centre bounce midfield heavy share, that he showed that a 90 plus scoring average and multiple tons is right within his wheelhouse. Now, how does this midfield mix look with? Does Sinclair get more opportunity with a Trevallia's recruitment via the draft? Does Macrae's trade change this dynamic up a little bit? Can the fitness of a Zach Jones hold up? Like, there's so much unknown. But again, it's pre-Christmas, it's December. We know there's amazing upside if he gets that opportunity, and I'm happy to take the punt at F2. Bailey Smith at F3. I think he's going to be one of the most highly owned players in the game. This value of under $600,000. He's got and going to have a full preseason bar any setbacks, and we know he's got a season where he's averaged over 100 in AFL fantasy, and even within that, there's actually a big chunk of that year he was pushing 110, 120. This does feel like one of the biggest gifts that could come our way to start the year. So I'm pretty happy to jump on that. So too with a Caleb Daniel. Now, for some, he might be F5, others F4. All depends who you have at F1, probably cascades down to his spot. But again, like Bailey Smith, I think a combination of in-bid value for him. It was about role and being the sub and some changes at the Bulldogs. For Smith, it was about injury. But I think you take the combination of the value based on his price point, now coming into a role that he's previously scored and averaged a 90, into a role that in a system and structure at North Melbourne, even last year with Fisher, McKercher and Sheasel, so you're not just having to go back to a Hall and Zeeble era, even as early as late last year. This was such a favourable scoring role in the North Melbourne system. I do struggle to see how and why people would have a narrative to fade him, but there's a world where it can happen. Then I've just hit cash cows for the rest of my spot, including my utility position. Elijah Hewitt, not going to be a higher scorer, but is a high impact player and should get high opportunity. Dan Curtin is another in that flat 300,000 market, doing everything right in the preseason and does seem to have cracked that best 23, albeit early, with Joe Berry and Ashton Moyer as my forward bench options. There's a bunch of really nice options through there, but I think those guys, while small forwards, do loom to have great job security based on the reasons their club made the moves they did in the off-season. For Carlton, releasing Owies. For Port, trading up to get their hands on a Joe Berry. They really wanted that pressure forward to sit alongside a Willie Rioli. And then I got Josh Smiley in at the utility. Again, what Peatling, what Flynn, what Whitfield, these are the important pieces that move in and around. But that is my starting squad. How similar is it to yours? Is it drastically different? Are there some similarity of players? Have I lost my rocker going that deep in the midfield? Probably. What does your ruck line look like? Comment below and let me know what your team looks like and who are some of the players you're bullish to start on in AFL Fantasy. Comment below and let me know. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, make sure you do so. And then do not forget January 1, our preseason goes absolutely into full gear with the 50 most relevant. A player a day ranked in order of who I think are the most relevant players we must have conversations about this preseason. I'll be joined by many of the friends here at the Coaches Panel and the broader fantasy football community. Great content creators and guests will be joining me. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. Thank you for subscribing, for commenting, and for giving this video a like. We can't wait to be back with you again real soon, looking at all the important pieces of your AFL Fantasy 2025 preseason.